Good morning, everyone. Mr. Sharkey here. Going to walk you through our expectations for this distance versus displacement activity for today's virtual day. We're going to start off just by reading through this introduction together to make sure what we're talking about. In class, we started looking at distance versus displacement. Some classes cut it pretty close to the bell, so I want us to talk about these terms together before we go ahead and take a look at the actual activity. So in our introduction, I'll tell you honestly, this is not my own story. I did not run 5Ks that much in high school. But we're going to read through this short story and see if it gives us an idea about distance versus displacement. In high school, I ran cross country, running 5Ks on the regular. If you ask the other racers how far I traveled, they would all tell you 5 kilometers. If you asked a group of physicists how far I traveled, they might all tell you 0 kilometers, that I didn't change position at all. It might surprise you to learn that both answers are correct. It all depends on the small, yet very important difference between distance and displacement. Sorry about the bell. So if we look, we've got 2 different terms that we're talking about, distance and displacement. Distance is how much ground is covered by an object, no matter its starting or ending position. There is no direction to distance. A little note that I think we can add here about distance. When we're measuring distance, we are measuring every step you take. That is, I would encourage you to write that note down. Whenever we're talking about distance, we're talking about every single step that you take. So in our activity in the lab last class, you followed kind of a random path. If you're measuring the distance, you measured the distance of every single step and then added all of those together to find your total distance. Displacement is a little bit different. Displacement is an object's change in position from its starting point to its ending point. A displacement measurement does not look at what route the object took to change position, only where it started and where it ended. So when we're talking about displacement, we're talking about the shortest route from start to end. It's easiest to picture displacement by finding where the object started and drawing a straight arrow from this point to the point where the object stopped moving. So this is what we did in kind of the last step of our lab, where we measured from our starting line to our ending line in a straight line. That is going to give us our displacement. It's the shortest possible route from where we started to where we ended. So that leads us to today's activity, and we're going to look at a couple examples together. To do this activity, you actually need to pull up Google Maps, which I have pulled up over here. And the first thing that we're going to do, we need to find Carmel High School on Google Maps. So if you go to Google Maps, you can either go to maps.google.com or you can just Google Maps, and you can find your way there. But once we get Google Maps pulled up, I just need to type in Carmel High School, and bada bing, it gives me a nice labeled section. In this first section of the activity, we are going to find directions from Carmel High School to all 4 of these different locations. So Fishers, Westfield, Noblesville, and Zionsville High Schools. Again, sorry about the bell. So once I have found Carmel High School, I can press this little directions button, and then I want my starting point to be Carmel High School. So right now it says Carmel is my final destination. So I'm just going to hit this reverse button, and now Carmel is my starting point, and I can choose my final destination. So I want to know how long it takes to get, I want to know how far Fishers High School is from Carmel High School. We're just going to look at the driving directions, so you can click on driving up here. We'll look at some other stuff a little bit later. As we look right now, it's giving me my measurements in miles. I want the measurements in kilometers. So if you look here, there's this options button on Google Maps. I can press options, change this to kilometers, and then I can close the rest of that out. So if we look, this is telling me what my current route is. I'm going to take the shortest route that I can get there. So I'd start off on Main Street, hop on Keystone, go to 146th Street, all the way to Howe, and then back on, I think that's Main 131st again. So this first route that it tells me, that's going to give me the total distance that I would need to travel. So I would travel 18.0 kilometers to get to Fishers High School. So I'm going to go ahead and fill in 18.0 kilometers. So that is the distance that I would have to travel. If I measured every single step that I had to take, I would have to follow this whole route to get from Carmel High School to Fishers High School. We're going to do that for Fishers, Westfield, Noblesville, and Zionsville High Schools. Then, after you finish those other four, we're going to move on to our second activity. So in the second activity, instead of finding the distance between the two schools, I want to find the displacement. So the displacement is going to be the shortest possible route. Notice in this route that I have on my screen, this is not the shortest route because I made a bunch of turns and stuff. The shortest route possible is always going to be a perfectly straight line. The issue is when I'm driving a car or if I was walking, I can't just walk in a straight line. I have to use the roads and sidewalks. So when we think about displacement, one thing that tends to help students out is if they think about how the crow flies. So if you were a bird, you could fly in a straight line. You could ignore the roads. You could ignore rivers or lakes, and you could go in a perfectly straight line. So Google Maps also lets us do that. We can find the exact distance between 2 points through a straight line. We call that the displacement. So let's read these instructions. Google Maps can also measure the shortest route from one place to another, rather than measuring every step along the way. We can measure the displacement from one point to another. To do this, we need to follow these steps. We're going to right-click on our starting destination, which is Carmel High School. So I'm going to get right on Carmel High School, right-click it, and then we're going to come down to the Measure Distance button. So I'm going to select right here. And you'll notice if we zoom in, sorry, I don't want to mess anything up. If we zoom in, we have this little point. That point is on Carmel High School right now. And then we want to click on our ending location. So to help me find my ending location, I'm going to show you guys Fishers High School. So if I search Fishers High School, it will show me where Fishers High School is. All I have to do is click right on my map. And now, if I scroll out, we'll see it gives me a perfectly straight line all the way from Carmel High School to Fishers High School. And this line is the displacement. Notice that this line does not follow roads or routes. It is a perfectly straight line. It's the shortest possible route from Carmel High School to Fishers High School. And then my measurement down here in kilometers is the thing that I want to record. So the displacement from Carmel to Fishers is going to be 12.98 kilometers. And then if I was ready to move on, I could right-click and I could hit Clear Measurement, and then I could reset it to find the other three values. However, once we found our displacement in kilometers, we want to fill in our displacements, and then we want to mark them on our little map. So if Carmel High School is in the center, Fishers High School was all the way over here, which is to the right, or if we're using our cardinal directions, it looks like it's pretty much directly east of us. So I'm going to draw a line from Carmel High School to Fishers High School, and I'm going to label that as 12.98 kilometers. You guys are going to do the same for Westfield, Noblesville, and Zionsville. So you should have 4 different high schools on your map, so on the map on your piece of paper, and then you should fill out all of this information. Once we found all our distances and displacements, I want us to go ahead and copy them down into this data table that you can see on the left side of the screen. So we just said that my displacement for Fishers High School was 12.98 kilometers. And just to double check myself, our distance traveled was 18.0 kilometers. So there's our first 2 values. You all should be able to figure out the distance and displacement for both Westfield, Noblesville, and Zionsville. Once we're done, we're going to answer these questions. I'm going to just make this full screen so we can see it a little easier. So I need to rank all the schools from the shortest to longest distance and the shortest to longest displacement. And then if we look, once you figure out the distance and displacement between Westfield High School, you should notice that they were different numbers. If we look at our example from Fishers, Fishers has a different distance from its displacement. And I want you guys to think about why those numbers are different. Every single high school should have a different distance and a different displacement. I just want us to try to see if we can figure out why that is. So this section right here, this is all the Google Maps stuff that I'd like us to do. The last piece, we're going to use Google Maps for a little bit of help, but you're going to transfer everything back onto this map that is printed on your worksheet. If you follow these instructions, you guys should be able to fill out the rest of Activity 3. In Activity 3, you're going from the Freshman Center at Carmel High School to Bub's Burgers. So you've got your starting point and your ending points over here. You're going to use Google Maps just like we did earlier. So to get the distance, you'll have to use the directions function of Google Maps. To figure out the total displacement, you'll have to use the measure distance function, just like we did earlier. Then there's a couple questions for you to answer. And then finally, on our last page, I want you to come up with your own definitions for distance and displacement. And then there's 3 final questions for you to answer. If you go through all of this information, I think you guys, as long as you've watched the video, you should be able to fill in the rest of our activity here. If you need more help, re-watch this video, see if it answers your questions. Otherwise, you can reach out to me or Mr. Stiller, and we'll gladly help you out. Hope you're all having a nice day, and I will see you shortly.